to turn it over to Lori now, and she'll pose the questions for the Q&A period for this morning's speakers.
We've had a few questions come in from the chat. Just have to locate it. So the first question is, for the industrial mineral mine in Northeast BC, what exact mineral is that for?
And so that's the Fireside Resources, and that would be white barite for the drilling industry.
I'm going to unmute you, Jonathan. Next question is for you. In 2017, AMEBC published a land use report detailing the availability of land for mineral exploration. Will AMEBC repeat this study in 2022?
Thank you for that, Jesse. That is a good question, and certainly something we're tracking. But we haven't made a decision on that yet.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone in the audience here have any questions for any of the presenters? You have a microphone up there if you do have any questions. Paul, I'm looking at you. Do you have any questions for any of the presenters?
Yeah, Nate, the Dakar deposit, certainly an exciting and new kind of deposit. The attraction, of course, is that with native nickel, if it can, has the potential to eliminate the high costs of milling and smelting, or concentration and smelting. But I wonder if has there been test work to see what kind of recovery can be obtained from you know, there would be separation by either, I'm not sure, magnetic or gravity?
With the nickel alloy, the main process for separation would be magnetic separation, and they as opposed to the actual numbers, I'm not sure right offhand, but they have done test studies to get the recovery rates. It's based on a Davis tube style recovery, and so that's available in their mineral resource estimate for their Baptiste deposit, and there will be doing more research into their van target for their to find that deposit and the amount of separation and recovery for that ore as well.
Okay, I'm just sorry, please clarify what is that Davis method?
Davis tube recovery is pretty much a specific method for being able to recover nickel out of ore. As to the actual recovery numbers, I'm not 100%. I can double check though.
Oh, that's okay. We'll put you on the spot for that right now. Thanks.
Is there any other questions from the chat?
Looks like there's a whole ton of questions for me.
Sorry, the chat monitor is slacking off. Okay, Jonathan, will splitting NROD into two ministries speed up permitting with one ministry focused on natural resource operations?
Thanks, Chris. We're certainly hopeful that it would. However, we really need to wait to see the mandate letter for the minister to see who heads that up to really evaluate, but certainly hopeful.
Thank you. Jonathan, another one for you. Is AME lobbying the government to get the vacant regional geologist positions filled?
Certainly having all those positions filled is, should be a priority for government, but it's, certainly within the broader scope of advocating for well-resourced public geoscience.
And another one for Jonathan. Could you please clarify what competitors you are referring to in regards to the 60-day permitting turnaround?
Certainly Newfoundland and Labrador might be the most visible competitor in terms of permitting turnaround. And then, of course, with other competitors, it's the pretty much that balance of permitting, fiscal incentives, et cetera. We don't necessarily track the nuances within each jurisdiction, but certainly Quebec and Ontario continue to be very competitive.
Okay, thank you. And there's just a comment here that the Prince George position is being advertised right now for the regional geologist position.
It is, yep.
Does anyone, looks like Jill Pardo has a question from the audience.
Yeah, and it's for Jonathan. And I'm just wondering, you mentioned about using the mineral potential modeling in land use planning. Are they refining this modeling again? Because last time we went through this several years ago, basically the polygons for mineral potential were too large to be effectively used.
That is probably a better question for the BCGS, and certainly Evan Orvan's work is essentially redefining the modeling so that it can be scale appropriate and obviously take into all sorts of more modern techniques and considerations that weren't done the last time around.
Okay. And then I just got a couple of comments of stuff that I've come across recently with the new database systems that they've brought in. This is not speeding things up. This is in fact slowing things down. Permitting takes a heck of a lot longer to actually create a permit these days. And I've heard this direct from the inspectors. But more importantly, maybe not more importantly, but recently I've also discovered that putting in for a notification of deemed authorization has some significant issues, since it doesn't seem to be being accepted by the new core system. And that's just put in for a couple of extensions for 2-year terms, and these have failed both down the southwest and up here in the northwest. So I don't know whether AIM is aware of this or not in terms of some of these issues that have been coming up.
Yeah, thanks for bringing those up, Jill. Of course, we're always interested in hearing specific challenges. So if you have anything specific that you'd like to share, we can certainly bring that up with government.
Sure, I'll send you an email on a couple of items.
Perfect. You know where I am.
You bet.
If I may comment, is Kevin here? I don't know if you can hear me.
Yep, you're good, Kevin.
It was our first time in permitting British Columbia. We've also been permitting in Newfoundland at the same time. I put the permits in Newfoundland after I filed the permits in BC. Newfoundland has gotten back a couple times. They had questions regarding my permit. Now we understand it's just about completed. BC, I don't even know. It's kind of gone into a black hole. I've had no verification that this even exists. I don't know who's going to review it. Nobody's gotten back to me. I have no sense of timelines, and here we are trying to plan programs. At the end of the day, I hear that it's probably going to take about 6 months, and we kind of banked on that. Yukon hasn't got a great record of permitting times either. I mean, it's absolutely shocking what's going on there. So, you know, I think Newfoundland is a great model to follow. They are very busy people right now, but they're getting through the permits quickly. You can't get a much busier jurisdiction than Newfoundland right now. And BC is got to improve. I also had issues when I was filing the darn things. They were asking for shape files and all that stuff. And I had to finally get my consultants to do a shape file to keep them happy, despite the fact that I gave them a ton of maps. So that was a bit of an annoyance as well. So I think there's a lot of issues to resolve there. And I hope BC does serve to improve. They're going to have to offer their geologists a lot more money as well. Let's face it, the pay schemes of British Columbia for geologists is inadequate right now. And so if you're going to get any good people at all, you got to pay them a lot more than what they're offering. That's my comment so far.
Thanks for that comment, Kevin. And as a person from Newfoundland, I hope to bring some of that Newfoundland efficiency over to the Northwest region in April. I guess we'll conclude.
We do have a couple more questions. We have a question for the Smithers Exploration Group. Will the slides be made available after the conference for people who missed part of it? And we are hoping to be posting the recordings online. So you might need to flip through, push your way through some stuff that you have had a chance to watch already in order to be able to get to the stuff that you missed. And we do have another question here as well to Jonathan or Nathan. Has MindSpace become usable yet? The question's being asked a number of times to have my BCE ID linked to active permits, and the person gets nowhere.
As for me, I'm not 100% sure on that, but I'm not aware that it is usable at this moment. Are you, Jonathan?
There's certainly progress, but I'm not sure what the exact status is.
Okay. And I notice we have an inspector in the who's with us as well. I'm just going to unmute you, Anastasia. Maybe you can add to this as well.
Hi, forgive me. I'm having a side conversation about all the questions. So please, please repeat the question.
So the question was, has MindSpace become usable yet? Sort of just throw you under the bus there, Anastasia. I have asked
No, that's
person asking the question has asked a number of times to have his BCE ID linked to active permits, and it has not happened yet.
so MindSpace is usable and functioning and active. It goes to a different group. The folks who do the technical works to get the BCE ID linked. So it's not us. And I am sorry, Jeremy, I have no idea why. I would suggest either trying again or double checking who you're contacting. And if you're on MindSpace, it should have a contact link. Oh, thanks, Martina. There we go. If you send it straight to mds@gov.bc.ca, those are the guys that are going to hook up your BCE ID to MindSpace. But yes, it's very active and working reasonably well and adding stuff in each time. So we're getting more and more stuff available on there.
So just a few things that are happening in the chat right now. There is the email address if you'd like to contact them about the MindSpace. And Christina Grislow replied that SEG will post the 2 mornings to YouTube in the near future. And I think that's it for questions, unless anyone else has some here, and we will break for coffee. See you back at, let me just check the agenda, 10:25.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin and Jonathan.
Yeah, thank you very much, Nate and Lori.
We're back. So next up we have Niels Peterson, Leif Bailey, and Megan Frederick. They're going to talk about the Galore Creek, the modern geoscience on a unique alkalic porphyry deposit. So Niels Peterson is a senior geologist with Galore Creek Mining. He studied geology at University of Alberta, obtained a master's in geology from UBC in Vancouver, and he spent 11 years in exploration and development projects from the Arctic to Peru in various technical roles before joining Galore Creek in 2019. Leif Bailey is a senior geologist with Galore Creek Mining. He obtained his Bachelor's of Geology in the University of Washington before getting a master's at UBC. Leif worked on projects from greenfields to active mine sites throughout North America, recently marking 10 years with Teck Resources. Congrats, Leif. He joined Galore Creek also in 2019. And Megan is a manager of geoscience and field operations for Galore Creek Mining. She is a professional project manager, geologist, and health and safety specialist, a graduate of the University of Utah. Megan has worked in oil sands, uranium, potash projects in technical and managerial roles. And in 2018, she became a senior mines inspector the health and safety for the Northwest region based in Smithers. And in 2021, she joined Galore Creek Mining Corporation. Go ahead, guys.
Hello, my name is Niels Peterson. I'm with Galore Creek Mining Corp. And today I'm going to talk about modern geoscience on a unique alkalic porphyry deposit at Galore Creek. I'd like to thank the Smithers Exploration Group for organizing the conference and the Gidimt'en clan of the Wet'suwet'en Nation for hosting the conference on their territory. So first I'll be going through the Galore Creek project today, its ownership and developments over the past 3 or 4 years, a background on alkalic porphyry geology and Galore geology, and then finish with a window on how we're using geoscience on a project with a long history and a lot of historic data to create some modern geological models. So firstly, I'm of course going to be making some forward-looking statements. We have embarked on a pre-feasibility study, excuse me. So I'll be making a few statements around that and plans to complete that work. And as always, there's uncertainty going forward on that. First thing to talk about is spotlight on safety. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about our helicopter operations and safety around that. So like most development projects in the region, the helicopter is a lifeline for our project. We use it for most of the site-based work, and in 2021 we had almost 2,000 hours flown and many more than that in 2019. So it's a real critical part of our project. And as we know, as many of the people here know, the terrain and weather conditions can be really difficult in this part of the world. And so we operate to a really high aviation standard. We use the best machine available for the job. And in most cases, that's the A-Star B3. And we also do an evaluation of the flight paths that are used on the project as to pick the best flight paths for the job and alternates in case of weather, inclement weather, or anything like that. During the operation, we also have multiple weather stations on the project, and there's cameras there that provide pilots with some real-time information that they can use to plan their routes and be sure that we're mitigating a significant project risk. So firstly, Galore Creek project had a very significant event in 2018, which was a purchase by Newmont Corporation of NovaGold's 50% interest of the project. So Galore Creek Mining Corporation operates the project on behalf of that partnership, the 50-50 partnership between NovaGold, or between Newmont and Teck, that has been in effect since then. So after a significant program in 2019, we had a hiatus in 2020 due to the pandemic, but then we officially entered pre-feasibility in 2021, and that is scheduled to complete next year. You can see 3 different studies that have been done in the past on the project, and there's been a lot of changes over the years. Probably the most significant change is that the current study is focusing on capital efficiency. So for example, there's no 17-kilometer tunnel proposed for the project anymore. That's no longer being considered. Talk now about the Tahltan involvement on the project. So the project has a proud history of collaboration with the Tahltan. There's a 2006 participation agreement that was signed that set a strong framework for that working together and moving the project forward with support from Tahltan. There's also a strong Tahltan presence on site. We've got Tahltan people engaged in the project as direct hires and also through Tahltan businesses who provide many of the critical services on the site. And through the pre-feasibility study, GCMC is working with Tahltan to discuss the study, the base case, options that are being assessed, and make sure that Tahltan perspectives are being incorporated into the planning and the work. So since that Newmont investment in 2018, we've had a lot of work done. We've got 32,000 meters of drilling for metallurgical, geotechnical, resource definition, and exploration. We got restarting of environmental baseline work and expanded technical studies from building on some of that historic work that was done. We've got significant maintenance and improvements to infrastructure as well, bridges, roads, camps. And in 2021, we also had a successful program that was fairly large, and we had no COVID cases on site, thanks to our medics, our safety protocols, and vigilance by everybody on site. Here's just one example of some recent drilling that was done in, well, semi-recent 2019 into the central zone. So it's looking in a little bit of detail about a couple of holes as part of that program that were drilled into the center of the deposit. And in the background, you can see the 2014 block model and proposed pit, the Whittle pit. So on hole 917 on the left there, you can see there's a gap of about 200 meters in historic drilling. So drilled in there and anticipated fairly strong mineralization, but we were quite pleasantly surprised. Very strong, much stronger than predicted by the block model. And then hole 912 on the right was actually drilled for geometallurgical sampling, but we extended it out through the bottom of the proposed pit to better understand those extensive mineralization. And again, we're pretty surprised by what we found. So it's an example of how we were getting good mineralization below even the proposed pits. We get sometimes unexpected waste to ore conversion within the pit, decreasing that stripping ratio. And it just shows that results are the quality of the ore body, I think, and showing the bounds of mineralization are not well defined yet. Speaking of the resource and the block model and everything, this is the current resource that's been issued publicly. It is pretty old. It's from 2014. It was only made public in 2019. There's currently a new in-house resource estimate being completed, probably to be disclosed end of this year, hopefully. Even though you can see the resource is about 1.1 billion tons, the base case for the pre-feasibility project or program is a more restricted 750 million tons. And the other thing you can get a sense of here is the clusters of the deposits and how in these alkalic porphyries you get discrete clusters of hydrothermal centers that then sometimes coalesce, like in the case of the central zone there, which is about 3 discrete zones kind of overlapping together. So now I'll just go into some of the geological context for the alkalic porphyries. I'm sure there's lots of people watching this who are quite familiar, but it's worth going through anyway. As many of you know, alkalic porphyries are pretty underappreciated historically due to mostly their rarity, but also they tend to be a little bit smaller, have smaller footprints at least. But they're still of really considerable economic interest because they are commonly enriched in gold. And so they make for very good deposits. They're also a bit more pyrite poor than their calc-alkalic cousins, so you get less issues with acid rock drainage and those sorts of things that are a bit nasty. Now in the BC context, there's no shortage of alkalic porphyry occurrences in the province. They're in the Quesnel and Stikine terrains, primarily, at least in the time equivalent horizon of Galore, so the late Triassic, early Jurassic. And on the right, you can see the total alkali silica plot, which shows some of the more well-known porphyries and producers in British Columbia, and their total alkalis versus the silica content in some of the rocks associated with them. So you can see that Galore Creek is a weird one. It is extremely alkaline and it's silica undersaturated. So we don't actually see basically any quartz in the hydrothermal assemblages, in the host rocks, in the intrusions. And you don't get that mineralized stockwork veining as you often see in many other porphyry deposits, even in other alkalic porphyries. So, and I'll show you some rock shots that gets that point across as well. This is the property geology here. you can see by the scale bar in the bottom right, it's 20 kilometers left to right. So we're talking about, at least on the main tenure block, more than 150,000 hectares in size, from Highway 37 in the east all the way to the coast belt on the west there. And in between, there's hundreds of square kilometers of Stahini group rocks that are really prospective for porphyry deposits. Within the project area there, you can see the Galore Creek and Copper Canyon. Those are the Galore Creek cluster, which is part of the mine plan. And then there's the Copper Canyon deposit, which is about 3 or 4 kilometers to the east, but still within the same valley. And then also on this slide, you can see the 2 camps that we have in operation right now. There's the road accessible Chiona camp on the east there, and then the Utlan camp is right next to the deposit in the main area. And you can also see the brown line, which is the access road alignment. So approximately half of that road is built, and the road equipment remains on site and maintained. Here's the geology in the deposit area. So the red outlines are the 0.2 copper grade shells. And then there's the background of the geological model showing the lithologies there. So we've got multiple intrusive phases. They are like plug-like to silliform in geometry. And the mineralization is hosted primarily in the coeval host volcanic rocks. So those green units on the upper right there. But we also get a significant amount of mineralization hosted in hydrothermal breccias. But as I mentioned, the mineralized veins are not really that significant. And the other thing here is the feldspathoid normative compositions, which are kind of odd. You get in the bottom left, you can see a pseudoleucite ferric volcanic there. Pseudoleucite is a breakdown product of the feldspathoid leucite. So it breaks down into nepheline and feldspar, but you can still see that remnant outline of those sort of orb-like looking phenocrysts, which are kind of weird. As I was saying, we do get mineralization hosted in breccias, but we get more breccias than just mineralized ones. We got everything from igneous breccias, rock flower matrix breccias, hydrothermal cemented breccias as well. And a couple of those examples there are quite well mineralized hydrothermal breccias in the syn mineral category there. You can also get an impression for the hydrothermal garnet. That's one of the other interesting things about this deposit. Garnet shows up as a common component of the alteration assemblages all over the place. And then this is the alteration and mineralization, or at least a couple examples, some pretty coarse mineralogy on the left there of calc potassic in the top left and calcic alteration in the bottom left, with really nice zoned hydrothermal garnets along with anhydrite. On the right are 3 examples of mineralization. So the top 2 are central zone and southwest zone, examples of some of that disseminated mineralization, still quite high grade, but it's kind of disseminated through those host rocks. And then on the bottom right, there's a really spectacular example of a magnetite-rich breccia called the opulent vein. And it essentially just comprises magnetite with copper sulfides and minor anhydrite. So extremely strong grades there, 3.5% copper, 2.5% gold. Unfortunately, it's not very big, but it is spectacular. Okay, so for the remainder of the talk, I'm just going to go through some of the development of the geoscience models that's been happening since we joined the project in 2019. We basically had to build the models from the ground up. There were some previous models, but they couldn't really be built off of at that point. So it's been quite a long road, but we've learned a lot, and give you a window into how that works. So the Galore geological model, it has obviously multiple components, has a lot of inputs, and we have a lot of customers, a lot of clients, a lot of purposes. So it could be resource potential, resource estimation, processing, mining. All of these have don't follow the lines, but all of these model components have multiple purposes. And so each one is important, but also each one needs to incorporate those purposes in their design. And they also need to have peer review. They need to incorporate peer review. They need to incorporate feedback from the end users. And in a lot of cases, there's changing needs as time goes on. And so it does require a lot of coordination and a lot of teamwork and constant improvement to these model components. So I'll just show 3 different examples of some of the geological model components, or at least the inputs and components that we have here. This is a fundamental and maybe sometimes somewhat neglected component of geomodels, which is the inputs to the geomodels. We've done a lot of work to on the database, rebuilding an acquired database from scratch. Life project QA/QC that took the better part of a year, trying to understand the QA/QC coverage for a lot of the historic drill data. But for our part, we were also interested in ensuring quality of the drill data. And that starts with things like the collar elevations. So you can see on the left there, we have a 2019 LiDAR-derived DEM. So we got a very, very good ground control. And when you compare all of the historic collars and their elevations to that DEM, you notice that there's some big outliers there. The 2007 and 2008 collars lie anywhere from 10 to 15, 20 meters below the actual ground surface due to some poor surveying at the time. And so we were able to fix those to the LiDAR DEM and thus get a much improved geological and resource modeling project. In a lot of cases, 10, 20, 30 meters makes a big difference when you're looking at some of those geomodels. On the right, there's also an example of where the overburden had changed. We changed it because of some maybe inconsistent logging between drill campaigns. So we had core photos, we had historical logs, re-logging on site in some cases to examine this overburden surface that we created this model, and then saw these huge divots in the model and kind of went, well, that doesn't seem right. What's happening? So you can see in the example on the right, there's 2 2004 drill holes that show pretty deep overburden, and then a 2005 drill hole in between them that shows shallow overburden. And what it turns out is that they had poor recovery in the 2004 program, and they logged extra 50, 100 meters of bedrock actually as overburden. And so by pulling that overburden surface up and accounting for that poor recovery, we actually were able to add about 3.5 million tons of mineralized rock in the pit outline to this deposit, which is a huge win just from doing some basic geoscience work. So the value of this, we're much more confident in our model inputs. We get more consistent and accurate model outputs. And in some cases, we can add some metal in the ground. Next thing to talk about is the structural model. The structural controls are critical in these alkalic porphyries. You can see the plunges of 2 of the deposit areas on the left there, the southwest zone and the junction. Pretty strong structural controls, strong plunges, and the structural model is the skeleton that everything else is attached to. So it's a strong control on mineralization, but it's also critical for the other model components. So we had core photos, we had televiewer data, we had surface mapping. And interpreting from those primary inputs, put a holistic architectural model together, supported by all those diverse data types. So whether you're controlling emplacement of mineralization, whether it's cross-cutting it, it's important to get it right. And I think we've done a very good job at taking at least a first stab at that. So in the end here, we get a better understanding of that deposit architecture, controls on mineralization, and also geotechnical impacts for the design pits. This is another third example here of another model component, which is acid potential and neutralization potential. If you're familiar with waste rock characterization, it is a major driver of project value. And so it's very, very critical to get this one right. So we have a huge 80,000 assay database of Aquarija data. So it's a bit of a weak acid leach. In a lot of cases, it's pretty limited use for us. But in this case, we were able to take samples, co-spatial samples where we had ABA information and we had Aquarija multi-element data for those same samples, and use those 900 samples to train a machine learning model to predict acid potential and neutralization potential in those additional 80,000 assays that occur around the entire deposit area. And that was great, because you can see in the bottom right there in those two red circles where we had AP and NP data pretty sparse. You know, we're waiting for a lot more AP and NP data to come in, but in the meantime, we still need the model. So what do you do in those areas? You try to predict the AP and NP. We don't estimate, we don't do the AP and NP estimation off of that predictions, but at least you can use that prediction to create geologically plausible domains for estimation. So you have a bit of sparse data, but at least you have a good idea of the domains that occur in that part of the pit, and you get a much better handle on your model architecture, even when you have very little input data. So output here, much better idea of your needs for mine rock handling and storage, water quality, even with historic data. And finally, a brief word on our Sequent Central modeling workflow. We have, from the ground up, we've had a pretty good time on the project evolution that we can leverage the Central platform. All of our input files, a topography surface, it's all hosted on Central. And every Leapfrog project hosts one or two model components. And then those are all live linked to the master project, which is sort of our project for sharing with other people, and then our domains projects, where we create our estimation domains for either waste rock or resource or anything like that. So because of the implicit modeling and because of this online cloud-based work platform, it means that we can have dynamic inputs. We can change our inputs at any time. The outputs are dynamic. The models are easy to update, and we can push them out to sharing with other people very quickly with no versioning issues. And that's really, really powerful, especially when you have to incorporate some of that peer review feedback, when you have to share with people from multiple companies, when there's contributors coming from different places, working in different places remotely. It helps us a lot. So finally, our path forward here, with Newmont and Teck working together now on the project, we've got this commitment to conduct the new pre-feasibility study. Geoscience has a really important role to play, not just in exploration, but also in demonstrating that geoscience understanding and making that the foundation for a lot of the other components of the study. So I hope I've shown that, like, applying new geoscience tools or even just some brute force geoscience work to decades of historic data on this project is unlocking some new value. I'd like to thank especially my counterpart, Leif Bailey, for this his contributions on this talk. I want to thank the geoscience team here on this slide, past and present. And thank you for the SEG to invite us to speak today. The email's on the bottom there if you have any questions after today. And thank you very much.
Thanks, Niels. It's great to see what's going on there at Gola Creek. Next up, we have Kay McKenzie, and Kay has worked in numerous exploration projects across Canada over the last 15 years. For the last 6 years, she's been working with Seabridge Gold across multiple roles, and currently she's working as a geologist and database analyst. She will be giving us a 2021 update on Iskut and KSM. Take it away, Kay.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kay McKenzie, and I'm a geologist with Seabridge Gold. My presentation for this year's Rock Talk will be focused on our exploration season at the Iskut project, but I'm also going to give a short update on the KSM project, as we've had a lot of activity there in the past year. As part of this talk, I will be making some forward-looking statements. In BC, Seabridge currently owns 2 projects, the KSM project adjacent to the Brucejack mine and the Iskut project, which is adjacent to the historical Snip mine on the Iskut River. We acquired the Iskut project in 2016 after reviewing its portfolio, and we felt it fit our business model of being a project that sits in North America. It already has a small resource to find, and as with all exploration companies, we felt we could grow its resource. Well, the Iskut property is mostly comprised of sedimentary rocks of the Stuhini Formation and overlying volcanic rocks, as well as some volcanically derived sedimentary rocks of the Hazelton Formation. These are intruded by Triassic to Jurassic diorite plutons. At other projects in the region, including our own KSM project, plutons of this age are seen to be the cause of mineralization. Recognizing that, we believe these plutons are what drives mineralization on the Iskut property. The volume of gold showings originally found on the property led us to think if we did systematic property-wide exploration, we would be able to help tie these showings together. When we started looking at quartz rise as a new target, we had mapped the lithocap at surface and found multiple talus grab samples with high gold values. So this gave us some indication that this came from a deeper porphyry source. We were also proximal to the historical Johnny Mountain Mine, which is about 2 kilometers to the south of Quartz Rise. And with those thoughts in mind, we focused our 2017 and 2018 exploration seasons around finding epithermal gold within the lithocap environment. There was plenty of indication of silica-rich fluid coming in and dissolving the Hazelton wall rock. We also had small indications of high grades when the chalcopyrite pyrite assemblages were present. However, after the 2018 season, our ultimate conclusion was that most of the prospective parts of the lithocap had been eroded and transported. In this slide, the bottom left shows a grab sample that's totally silica dominant QSP replaced volcanic rock. The top right image shows structurally controlled high-grade gold within the lithocap in outcrop. And the bottom right shows multi-episodic silica introduction that we encountered when we were drilling the lithocap. 2019 was when we started focusing more on finding a larger porphyry system that would have been the source for the lithocap mineralization. We started with additional mapping and an IP geophysical survey on Quartz Rise. 2020 was focused on drilling around the brecciated diatreme we had located in previous years, which is the red cylinder in this image. We were targeting the high chargeability anomaly, that is the cream blob just to the right of the diatreme. The high mag anomaly is also focused around the diatreme as well. In 2021, we anticipated that we would need to drill deeper to find the porphyry system responsible for the mineralization we found when drilling in 2018 and 2020. Our plan for 2021 was to do additional MT geophysics to add on to the lines we had done in 2020 on Quartz Rise. We were hoping to get further definition on the high resistivity anomaly that the 2020 MT surveys had started to show. We intended to drill an additional hole with the help of the new 2021 geophysics, and time permitting, we were going to drill a hole on Bronson Slope. With the expected target depth being deep from surface at quartz rise, we wanted to have the geophysics completed in order to have the best data to finalize our drill target. The drilling was set to start later in the season. We ended up re-entering a hole from 2020, QR-20-23, as we had less time than intended to complete our drilling, and our target was quite deep once we were given the initial results from the MT survey. We picked the hole as we thought it would still get us to our intended target. We ended up starting at 740 meters and we drilled to 1635. So we completed about 900 meters of drilling. And I just wanted to show you the range of some of the units we intercepted. Starting on the top left, we have a siltstone unit showing some biotite alteration that looks moderately cooked. And on the top right, we have an unaltered porphyritic monzonite unit showing some large feldspar phenocrysts. On the bottom left, as we moved deeper, we started moving into dominantly volcanic rocks, sometimes showing this patchy, irregular, and spotty alteration. And if you look right, just to the right of the core block, you can see it's showing some breccia textures with rare quartz veins and sulfides. The bottom right was this very strong bleaching of the rock, sericite alteration, and some pyrite. This was, you could see this continuously for about 100 meters, and it became more patchy as we got to the end of the hole. We ended in this unit, and the only reason we did was because we got weathered out for the season. And this is a section of our hole that showed the highest grades of copper this year. It's about 12 meters above that strong sericite alteration. So right after the small fault at 1477, we got some copper grades of up to 0.16% over a 12-meter interval, but the interval is too small to be significant, especially at these depths. But you know, it's an indication there's mineralization. And the higher mineralization was in this lighter colored volcanics, showing more sericite alteration. This image is actually from the completed geophysics from 2021, and you can see where we had originally targeted the resistivity high to be. But once they completed it, we now know it is further to the south, so the right of the image. This theory also fits with what we ended up drilling this year. We drilled some very bleached rocks from 1475 to 1520 with some faults showing indication of mineralization. So we could likely have been drilling near the northern extent of the porphyry intrusion. What we then did was look at the ideal model we had been using as a template to incorporate our diatreme, and we chopped it up to lay it out on our image and theorize where we could look next. The model with this perspective, it would indicate that the system has a more north-northwest dip to it than we had originally foreseen. If we approach future exploration with this model, it should allow us to be more productive. We would be able to target the deeper porphyry system from a lower elevation, which should allow for a longer drill season and hopefully fewer delays. Even though the indication is that the system is still fairly deep, around 1,500 meters, it is more achievable at the lower elevations. And we've consistently seen signs of a large porphyry system at Quartz Rise, which is why we've kept coming back here in the past few years. The scale and distribution of the porphyry system components outlined here is consistent with a big system. At the end of the season, we looked at our newly defined resistivity high on a property-wide scale. Our experience at KSM has shown us that there's likelihood of there being a porphyry cluster. We have a resource already defined at Bronson Slope, but the geophysics indicate there is a resistivity high underneath it. So this is something we'll be looking at targeting this year, hopefully to define the deeper porphyry. We're also hoping to have a chance to look at Snip North as another potential porphyry, which is that purple blob off to the right. Taking a closer look at Bronson Slope, the historical drilling has focused on targeting this quartz monzonite skarn in blue, and they typically stopped once they got into the monzonite porphyry, which is the pink unit. The hole on the left is an example of this. You can see the gold grades in orange and the copper grades in blue are high in the skarn, but they continue to have some grade once you get into the porphyry unit. And if you look at the hole on the right, you can see that the grades pick up once again once they get into the porphyry. Our exploration strategy is moving forward to target this monzonite porphyry at depth. A little bit about Snip North. You can see by this image that the property has similar lithologies to the southern prospects. Sedimentary rocks with nearby intrusives. To date, there's been a bit of surface sampling and mapping, as well as some drilling, the latest being done in 2007. These historicals show high gold at surface. All the holes drilled to date are shallow holes, so we would be looking to do some deeper holes in an attempt to locate a porphyry. We plan on starting with additional MT survey, and that would give us a continuous survey from Quartz Rise all the way down to Snip North. So alongside acquiring a new exploration interest, we also acquired an environmental liability. The historic Johnny Mountain mine had not been properly reclaimed, and Seabridge Gold understood that purchasing these claims meant doing the right thing and properly reclaiming it. During the summer of 2021, our environmental department continued to direct the rehabilitation of the Johnny Mountain mine site. Seeing as KSM is a big part of Seabridge's portfolio, I thought I would give you a quick update on that project. 2021 was a monumental year for the KSM project, with the imminent deadline of having to achieve a substantial start on the construction of the project by July of 2024, which is when our EA certificate will expire and we can't get a second extension. We took big steps towards meeting that goal. One of the biggest ones was being able to have the workforce to do it. And over the last year, we have more than doubled our internal Seabridge staff, as well as many different contractors to help complete the work. In the midst of all the hiring of these employees, we were also carrying out a massive amount of work on multiple work fronts. So we constructed 2 new camps, Hotter Camp, which is in this image here. It's very close to Val2, just off the highway. And we also constructed Camp 3, which is located on the Eskay Creek Road. We continued doing some earthworks at Camp 9, which is a bit closer to the KSM exploration camp. We commenced work on Coulter Creek Access Road, and that is basically an extension of the Eskay Creek Road, which brings you closer to the future mine site. We commenced work on the Glacier Creek fish habitat offset plan. Some of the construction that we will be doing in the future requires us to create a new, essentially a new habitat for any fish that we will be displacing because of the construction. We also did additional geotechnical drilling along the alignment of the tunnels, as well as at different locations intended for infrastructure in the future. We also did drilling on our newly acquired Snowfields deposit, which included both some geotechnical and metallurgical testing. We continued with our yearly environmental baseline studies. 2022 is going to mark the first year that Seabridge will not be doing any exploration work on the project since its purchase. So our department will not be involved in any of the work this year, but 2020 is planning to be an even bigger year than 2021. So I just wanted to say thank you for listening to my presentation. And I believe I'll be around later for any questions that anyone has. Thanks.
Thank you, Kay, for that update for ISKIT and KSM. Now we'll move on, which is Dave Lefebvre, and he will be speaking on BC's volcanogenic massive sulfide deposits. So Dave has more than 30 years of experience with government geoscience surveys and mineral exploration companies. He's an economic geologist and is knowledgeable about a wide variety of mineral, industrial mineral, and coal deposits. He is a chief geologist for the British Columbia Geological Survey.
Hey, Dave, I just know you're muted. You're on mute, unmuted right now, but it was being quite noisy.
Okay, take it away, Dave.
Hi there. You were going to run the PowerPoint from your end with the voiceover on it?
Hi, Dave. We have a PowerPoint from you, but I don't believe it has. I don't believe the PowerPoint has any speaking with it.
It should. Just try it. It'll be better if you can run it from there. But
okay, we will try that out. Stand by in case we need you to present it for us.
yeah, sure. No, and I'm happy to do it if you just run the screen. But I'll just put the dog out of the room.
Okay, thank you. So Dave, we have this just as a PowerPoint, but we don't have audio that's associated with it. So we will need you to present it for us.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you sound good now.
And you'll advance the slides for me?
Yeah, just let us know when you want it advanced and we will
Okay.
we'll advance it for you.
Thanks. It's a pleasure to be speaking to you today from Salt Spring Island in British Columbia, which is located on the unceded traditional territories of the Coast Salish First Nations. Always a pleasure to be involved with the Smithers Exploration Group, so thank you very much for the invitation, and thanks to the volunteers. Next slide. The presentation I'm making today has benefited from information published by Jim Franklin and Al Galley from alumni of the Geological Survey of Canada. They provided a number of figures which I've used in this presentation, and they are a couple of the people who've been involved with developing VMS models in Canada. Canada leads as in understanding the different types of VMS deposits. Also like to thank my colleagues, Trygve Hoy, Danny Aldrich, and Nick Massey of the BC Geological Survey, who worked with me on volcanogenic massive sulfide deposits. I see the timing's kicked in. So you might ask, why am I talking about these VMS deposits at Rock Talk? I've recently updated 8 deposit profiles for the BCGS to add to the existing deposit profiles that have been around since the late 1990s and early 2000s. And of those, 5 of those were for VMS type deposits. Remember, these profiles are usually intended for people who do not know a deposit type. And they will be not just the VMS ones, but the other ones. So why should you explore in BC for volcanogenic massive sulfide deposits? Well, they're globally attractive VMS deposits in BC, and I'll show you some examples of that. Next. BC is underexplored for VMS deposits, and I'll explain that, why that is. And there are now 6 VMS mineral deposit models that you should be using when you explore. If we look globally, what you see is that you can see the Canadian Shield with a lot of VMS deposits there, and you can see the Western North America, including the Northern Cordillera, with a number of VMS deposits. But there are lots of places in the world where you do not find VMS deposits. Next. Next slide, please. Okay. This is just a map showing the various locations for some of the major VMS deposits in British Columbia, the Yukon, and Alaska Panhandle. Note Wolverine near the far north, which you may not know is a deposit. Greens Creek in the Alaska Panhandle, just south of Tulsa Chief there. So BC has the richest VMS deposit in the world in Eskay Creek. Most of you will have heard about that. It's a gold-rich VMS, gold-silver-rich VMS. We also have the largest VMS deposit in the world, Windy Craggy. You can see the Windy Craggy resource there of 297 million tons. You would be attractive VMS deposits in BC are going to be shown by the size there of, for very large ones, going not just Windy Craggy, but Antioch, Grand Duke, Britannia. We also have the precious metal rich ones, not just Eskay Creek, but Greens Creek in the Alaska Panhandle, Torbrit, which we're starting to hear more about in recent times. And then there's a potential for critical metals, particularly cobalt from Windy Craggy type deposits or Beshi deposits, but other ones that are byproducts associated with VMS deposits. BC is underexplored. This is because some of the more prospective BC regions were expensive to explore in and lacked infrastructure, and still true in some areas. The mountainous terrain has limited one of the key ways of finding VMS deposits, which is limited geophysical surveys in various areas. And in Ontario and Quebec, the provincial governments provided EM surveys, which are very helpful. So that's led to less exploration in BC. Obviously, we've seen a focus on porphyry and gold deposits, and that's coupled with less VMS expertise, particularly prior to the 1980s, when the VMS exploration was largely out of Toronto and largely in the Canadian Shield. The graph on the bottom just shows, I think, some of the potential for BC to catch up with some of the other provinces in terms of numbers and tonnage of base metal deposits. Many VMS prospects in BC warrant more drilling or have yet to be drilled. So in talking about the different types of VMS deposits, we have stratiform massive sulfides, which are both SEDEX or sedimentary exhalative massive sulfide deposits, and VMS or volcanogenic massive sulfide deposits. The classification is morphology and mineralogy, but then when you get to the types of VMS deposits, we now classify them mainly by regional rock sequence, but also using commodities, mineralogy, alteration, geological environment, and tectonic setting. Just a reminder of what is a massive sulfide. It's more than 50% sulfides in the rock. You can see a band of massive sulfide in the bottom. Typically, there's abundant iron sulfides, pyrite or pyrrhotite, And just remember, when you hit a massive sulfide intersection, the driller knows you found it before you do, although they don't know if it's ore yet until you assay it. Next slide. There are 6 types of VMS deposits, and these are broken into classically the Kuroko, Noranda, Eskay, Cypress, Bathurst, Iberian, and Beshi types. You can see the deposit profile codes associated with 5 of those. We do not have a profile for the Bathurst type. They can be divided on the left into felsic volcanics, on the right into mafic volcanics. And the 4 at the top, okay, on to the next. The information I'm giving you today is based and well described both by Franklin and his other authors in 2005, the Society of Economic Geology 100th anniversary volume, and also by Al Galley in a 2007 publication by the Geological Association of Canada. And a lot of the information I'm presenting here is very clearly presented in their 2 articles. You can see that they also have provided classification names based on the composition of the rocks. So Kuroko is bimodal felsic, Noranda is bimodal mafic, Eskay is hybrid, the Cypress is mafic dominant, Bathurst is felsic siliclastic, and Beshi is felsic mafic. And so modern terminology is the terminology on the right. I will continue to show both terminologies for those of us who are more familiar with it. The 4 types at the top are mostly flows with minor sediments, and they are distinguished from the Bathurst and Beshi types, which are the Bathurst has fragmental volcanics and sediments, whereas Beshi is clastic sediments with variable amounts of flows, usually as sills. The whole stratigraphic package, which is used for these classifications by Franklin and Galley and others, they're 1 to several kilometers in depth in terms of the sequence. So sometimes if you just have a less well-known occurrence, it can be difficult to assign these classifications to your deposit. Thought I would start with Noranda, a bimodal mafic type of deposit, just to give you some examples of what a massive sulfide deposit often will look like. So you have a massive sulfide lens. It can be zoned. You can have a basal contact that's shown. The ore zone can extend several tens of meters into that stringer zone. The stringer sulfides are often sort of like a cylinder or a pipe, usually with chalcopyrite and pyrite, and they extend a few tens to hundreds of meters below most lenses, particularly in a Noranda type. These massive sulfide lenses are associated with exhalate horizons with a lot of silica, some pyrite, hematite, and some minor metals in it. If those of us who've seen videos of seafloor massive sulfides have seen black smokers, these are the ones that produce the exhalites. And there's a diagram just showing what the hydrothermal plume coming out of the vent looks like, and will disperse some of that particulate matter into a bed that's going to be conformable or at the same time horizon as massive sulfide. You need to remember that as a geological feature, these massive sulfide ore bodies are very small. And so that exhalite horizon can be very important in actually getting to a massive sulfide lens. And thinking it's these lenses, particularly for an Noranda type, are usually less than tens of meters. The horizontal dimension less than hundreds of meters. So it's important to have that. It's also the alteration associated with the stringer zone beneath the ore body is important. It can be quite intense, chlorite or sericite for the Noranda type model. And you can see the andesite at the bottom, which has been totally altered to sericite. So it looks like a rhyolite actually, and obviously a very soft rock, so you can tell that. This is important in tilted sequences, picking older rocks, because it gives you a larger target when that deposit is tilted. You look for the stringer zone, you look for the alteration, you use geochemical analysis to help you identify that feature. Rock geochem has been very important in VMS exploration. Also important to remember, not just with Noranda type, but with all types of VMS deposits. VMS deposits often occur in clusters. And so if you find a small one, you might go looking for a larger one that might be economic. The Kuroko and Noranda example exhibited in this figure on the right. You can see the deposits shown as black dots. You can see the areas of proximal scale alterations shown in red. And you can see the dashed outline is the area with the presence of felsic volcanic rocks associated in a mafic sequence. Curdillan examples with clusters are Antiox, Britannia, Grand Duke. Unfortunately, there are barren massive sulfide lenses out there, pyrrhotite or pyrite, with no ore in this, with them. They may have some chalcopyrite and can respond to geophysics. So you just need to be aware that you're going to hit some negative holes. We look at Noranda bimodal mafic. We're just going to look at the diagram on the right there. You can see that in this, Noranda has shown that stacked lenses. It's sitting in a sequence of pillowed mafic flows, and the main lens is sitting on top of a lobe of rhyolite. So dominantly mafic sequence and then you can see the halides shown in blue. And this is some schematic diagrams developed by Al Galli and his associates, and I'll be showing you some more as a way of representing what these deposits are like. You can see some of the details on the left, but I'm just going to keep moving on. These lenses can take lots of drilling to find them. Borehole EM can be very effective in trying to find the massive sulfide lenses. You can see the Galli's and associates shows the average tonnage, which is 6.3 million tons, not that large, but very interesting polymetallic, but the median size is over 100 million tons. So there are some quite significant deposits of this size, predominantly in the shield. We don't really have good examples of Noranda types deposits in BC. Here's the Kuroko or bimodal felsic type of VMS. And you can see the diagram on the left. It is schematic, but showing a typical Kuroko type deposit with mostly felsic volcanic rocks. And you can see that the Kuroko type deposits actually have 6 types of ore, including barite and gypsum ore in the collection. And then we can see the Galli type diagram on the right, which is sort of a simplified version of it. You notice that it's felsic flows and volcaniclastic material. You can see the ore shown in orange. You can see a barite cap, which is not as extensive as the normal halides, but it can extend beyond the mound, the sulfide mound. And you can see the alteration in the bottom. We look at the average and median size of these deposits. Again, they're smaller. They're not as large. They don't get as large as the Noranda ones often, although there are some very significant Kuroko deposits. We'll see them in a minute. Britannia mine operated 1907 to 1977. It's a cluster of deposits with multiple massive sulfide lenses, but had a lot of stockwork ore that was produced, and it was just under 50 million tons of just over 1% copper with significant silver and gold grades. Myra Falls is another Kuroko style mineralization mine still operating on Vancouver Island. And it has a total resource of 41 million tons. And you can see there it has a higher silver and gold values in the overall resource. There are 12 massive sulfide lenses at 2 stratigraphic horizons with varying polymetallic composition associated with them. We move on to the next type of VMS. It's what we call SK, or what I call hybrid felsic. This is a model that's just developing. We remember that Eskay Creek was hit when I was still working in Smithers as a regional geologist in the late 80s. It precipitated identifying this style of VMS. And so we can see there's a simplified model provided by Galli there on the right. It's associated often with felsic films and domes and can have that barite cap you see with the Kuroko type, but it's got very high gold and silver grades. Eskay Creek of this type is unusual in perhaps having such high gold grades. The group of deposits is more characterized by high silver values. They're limited copper stringers, and there's some interesting and quite different alteration than we find with other VMS deposits associated with these hybrid felsic deposits. Sorry about that. So Eskay Creek mine, excellent example, produced 4 million ounces of gold, 150 million ounces of silver. At one point, it was the 2nd largest Canadian gold producer and the 5th largest world silver producer. You can see some of the ore on the bottom, a very different mineralogy, very unusual mineralogy, and different looking ore than we see in our more standard VMS deposits. You can see the Skeena Resources. I just threw in a couple of slides. They have a proven and probable reserves of 26 million tons, 3.37 grams per ton gold and 94 grams per ton silver. Not bad for an open pit. I also think Greens Creek in the Alaska Panhandle may be a hybrid VMS. It's got a resource of 24 million tons, 13.9% zinc, 5% lead, over 600 grams silver per ton, and 5 grams per ton gold. It's hosted by sedimentary rocks, which has caused some misunderstanding as to how it might have formed, but it occurs at a base of a Triassic graphitic argillite with dolomite, and it's the stratigraphic equivalent to some basalt and subordinate rhyolite of the same age. The footwall package of older rocks shows a very strong chlorite, sericite, quartz, and pyrite alteration characteristic of the VMS. It's in the same rift sequence as we find Windy Crag, much further to the north. Eskay Creek is also in a rifted sequence, and I think that's one characteristic, particularly if you're near the edge of the rift. This deposit's been considered a SEDEX deposit, now considered to be a VMS deposit, usually talked about as a Beshi, but I think given the characteristics and the commodities, it's probably a hybrid VMS deposit. Hybrid VMS deposits like Eskay Creek, they're not common, but they're not rare. It's an emerging model with lots to learn, so that always means there's more potential to go out and find interesting deposits of that type. They include VMS deposits mined for copper with higher gold values. So Eskay Creek, Torbrit, Sematosum, maybe Hackett River in Nunavut, and Nimbus in Australia, which is very similar to Eskay Creek, but without the higher gold values, are some examples. But we also have La Ronde, which I would put in the hybrid VMS deposits, Bousquet, and Boliden. This is a bit more controversial. And then, of course, we just talked about Greens Creek. So we want to look for those polymetallic gold, silver rich deposits more. Cyprus or mafic dominated VMS type deposits are fairly simple. They're in a mafic sequence. They again could be pillowed volcanics. They have a banded jasper sulfide sort of horizon at the top, and it forms a more extensive xeolite that you can explore with it. There is pipe alteration and a prominent copper stringer zones. They do have interesting gold and silver values associated with them, but they tend to be quite small deposits. The classic examples are obviously in Cyprus, but they're also in the Oman. And most of the time we've classified Antiochs as this type. What you can see here is that it's had significant production, over 21 million tons, mostly of copper, but with some higher silver values. But the actual resource of Antiochs is much higher than that. And you can see a couple of 77 million tons of 0.55% copper equivalent, or 45 million tons grading 0.6% copper. This makes it one of the largest Cyprus-type VMS districts in the world, because there are multiple lenses that were mined in that area. We switch to Beshi or Politic Mafic VMS. This is like Windy Craggy. And we can see the simplified diagram on the right. If we look at that, what we can see is it's mostly an argillite sequence with some shale, but you have basalt dikes and sills coming in. You can see the orange sulfides associated with one of the stratigraphic horizons. And so that it's large tabular lenses. You can see the average size is 34 million tons and the median size is 148 million tons. These are much larger massive sulfide bodies. And at times they can be semi-conformable. Examples would be Windy Craggy, Goldstream, and the Beshi deposit in Japan. So many of us have heard about Windy Craggy in the extreme northwest BC. It has a resource of 297 million tons, as I mentioned, considered to be the world's largest VMS deposit. It's very likely in a cluster of deposits based on preliminary exploration and BC Geological Survey mapping. No production because it was parked in the 1990s. You can see a massive sulfide boulder associated with some of the glacial deposits around it. Grand Duke is also considered to be a Beshi type deposit. For some of these deposits, subsequent metamorphism and deformation can make it difficult to establish the type of them, particularly if they've not had good mapping in the region and on the ground. It was mined between 1971, 1978, 1981 to 1984, and has significant reserves remaining in the ground after the mine. The final type we'll talk about is Bathurst. It's a felsic stiloclastic type of VMS, and it's rare in the Northern Cordillera. We haven't done a profile for it for that reason in British Columbia. If we look at the diagram on the right, we can see that it's a felsic volcanic clastic and epiclastic sequence with the massive sulfides shown in orange. These deposits, and it's overlined by usually by felsic epiclastics, some sediments and minor volcanics. These are very large, median size 64 million tons. They're lead zinc rich and they have high silver grades and significant gold values. The only siloclastic felsic VMS deposit we know of that's been defined clearly is in the southern Yukon. It belongs to the camp of polymetallic felsic VMS deposits, including Kusakaya and GP4F. It's the Wolverine. Its volcanic sedimentary setting is similar to the Bathurst mining camp in New Brunswick, which has a huge size. And I need to move on here. The one of the things that this suggests is the Kootenay terrain, where the Wolverine deposit is, which is also found in southern BC, may indicate that we should be looking near Goldstream in the Kootenay assemblage there. So I'm going to end with a question. Sorry, I've been going so fast. This is BC's Harper Creek deposit. It's identified as a VMS deposit. You can see all the drilling on the left. You can see the zones shown in red, these tabular mineralized zones, 2 horizons for the west deposit, west side of the deposit. Is it a giant VMS deposit? I've been sleeping under a COVID rock, it seems, because I just learned in the last while when I was preparing for this talk that the deposit is 817 million tons and it's 0.28% copper. Well, this would be the largest VMS deposit known in the world. It's located north of Kamloops. There are numerous VMS deposits in the region, but they're much more traditional VMS deposits with a massive sulfide lens and some stringer mineralization. The host rocks are metamorphosed, and so it's a little hard to know what's going on here, but they are definitely altered. They're phyllites and schist, and there's a quartzite unit that's about 45% of what they drilled. The zones measure many tens of meters in thickness of this sort of disseminated lower grade mineralization, but there are some minor massive sulfide layers that are pyrite, pyrrhotite, sometimes with magnetite, but they're minor volumetrically. Armstrong and Hawkins call this a remobilized massive sulfide deposit. So I'm putting that out there. Anybody who has ideas to what type of deposit it is, I'd love to hear them. And thanks very much to the Smithers Exploration Group for putting this on. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Dave. So we had some technical problems there. The presentation was playing through automatically. We just didn't have your sound involved with that. And we are actually having a few technical difficulties with the computer that we're running the Zoom call through. So I haven't actually been able to access the chat. It does look like it sorted itself. No, it's still having issues. So I haven't been able to access, never mind, our technical crew here has fixed it off screen. Okay, so I'm gonna go through and see if there's any comments and we will go on to the questions.
Perfect. Thanks, Dave.
So if you have any questions, please post them in the chat. We can see it now, including for the previous presenters. And Martina Brasola, Mines Inspector with Ministry of Energy and Mines, has also posted a few links for notice of work applications. If you just companion policies to companion documents to help you submit notice of work applications. If you would like to have a look at those, let me know in the chat if you can't access them and want me to post them again.
And if anyone has any questions here in the audience, we feel free to come up to the microphone and ask them. So I have a question for Dave. So just going to wonder, when searching for new VMS deposits, would you suggest any specific methods to help in exploration targeting to find VMS deposits? For example, I know you mentioned borehole EM, and would these methods work better or worse for a specific style of VMS deposits?
Well, it works best, for the ones you're chasing the massive sulfide lenses. So borehole EM will work really well for Noranda types, and I have personal experience with that. It will work well for Kuroko because they have these well-defined lenses, and they'll typically have quite a bit of chalcopyrite in them. The Cypress type, again, would work well. The Beshi and Beshi should work as well. Yeah, so that it's going to work for those. I'm less familiar with Bathurst, the Bathurst type, and Eskay Creek. Probably not as clear cut for Eskay Creek because you sort of, it's almost like in many cases they're shallow water systems. So you have vein systems and more Stockberg type systems associated with them perhaps. And the massive sulfide lenses are smaller, and the composition, as we saw with Eskay Creek, is quite different. So if you're lucky enough to be drilling for massive sulfides with those caveats for the deposit types, yes, you should be doing borehole EM and using that because they are small targets. In Noranda, the company I worked for had drilled and they found a massive sulfide lens, but they drilled 4 holes that were within 50 meters of the massive sulfide lens, but it was in a regular amoeboid shape, and the first 4 holes they drilled were on just outside of the massive sulfides, and it was the 5th hole that hit it. So they are small enough targets, and they can be complex enough that borehole geophysics help a lot.
Okay, what about less invasive surveys? I guess.
Well, a lot of companies and a lot of prospectors still perhaps don't appreciate the importance of looking for the wall rock alteration. In fact, probably if you're going to look at some of the existing information in MinFile and assessment reports and property file, you want to go looking at geochemical analysis, looking for sodium and calcium depletion. Those alteration pipes can be fairly large features, and they will show up in the geochemistry. So sampling rocks to look for alteration. Obviously, if you're out there prospecting, if you see sericite or chlorite, volcanic rocks that are intensely altered to sericite or chlorite, which can develop a bit of a foliation and look and core like poker chips. Yeah, you want to get excited about that if you're in the right sort of ballpark for looking for those type of deposits.
Okay, thanks. I'll just make a comment that borehole EM does work for Bathurst style VMS deposits. I have many hours spent in a tent doing borehole EM surveys. But yeah, thanks for that.
Okay, we have a couple of questions from the chat. Dave, is there a question for Greens Creek Windy Craigie Rift?
Well, I think these hybrid deposits, one of the key controls, not the only control for some of them, is that they form in shallower water. And if we think of rifts, as you go to the margin of the rift, the water's going to get shallower. Queens Creek, I don't know that well, but it appears to be fairly close to the edge of the rift, away from where the volcanics are that are equivalent to time equivalent to the mineralization that are probably more central in the rift. And so I think you want to look along the margins of larger rifts where the water may be shallower, and you're more likely to get the hybrid VMS. It's not the only potential control, but it's one of the easiest to understand and I think fairly common.
There's also a comment here that SEG has a suite of rocks from Windy Craigie. If you want to know what it looks like, we have that in the rock room. Another question for Dave. Do you think that district scale airborne EM could potentially find undiscovered VMS clusters?
Sure. geophysics is a great way to explore for them. And so you just have to be, and we have the tools now, which we didn't have 20, 40, 50 years ago, to fly these surveys, to fly them in being controlling for the relief to make sure that the survey is leveled out to be the comparable elevation for the information you're reporting across mountainous terrain. So yeah, no, it's relatively expensive, but if you think you have a prospective area and you can afford it, there's a good chance to find more VMS deposits in BC that way. You know, we've got lots of ridges that have been prospected, but we have lots of areas that are in mountainous terrain that are, you know, forested and covered by a lot of overburden, but not a lot of outcrop. So should work very well and should be very helpful. Nice when the government does it for you as a first pass.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Dave, for that. We'll allow another minute or so just for any last minute questions to come in the chat.
Does anyone in the audience have any further questions?
Okay, just doesn't seem like there's any further questions.
Nope.
Thanks, Jax, for the
Just needed to
comment.
scroll down there.
You just did a great job. So I'd like to thank the sponsors. We can put up that list of sponsors. Yeah, Pretium Resources, Minerals North, CMC Metals, Hardline Exploration Corp, ERM, Terrain Geoscience, TriPoint Geological Services, Banstra Transportation, Airways Drone Services, Geotech Drilling, Telqua Coal, Blue Lagoon Resources, High Tech Drilling, KSM Mining, Matrix, Galore Creek Mining, and PNR Exploration Services. I'd also really like to thank Steve Taylor for his job with the audio-visual services, and as well the Smithers Curling Club, which has graciously hosted us here. And with that, I think that brings the 2022 Rock Talks to a wrap. We'll have be following with a lunch here in person. Thank you.